Hiya, I'm Stacey. Welcome back to Vintage Stacey. Today I thought I would do my February TBR because I'm doing my Fab Four February reading challenge and working my way through the Beatles books on my TBR. So I thought I would let you know what books are on my TBR and what I'm going to be trying to get through. I don't know whether I'll get them all done this month, but I'm really going to have a crack at getting through as many of them as I can. So first up we have John and Paul, A Love Story in Song. This is by Ian Leslie. This one is about the Lennon-McCartney relationship and the friendship between, and the rivalry between John and Paul, and the impact that that has on the music that they create, their own personal lives, the people around them. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one because it's such a complex relationship and because it is like at the core of the Beatles. I'm really looking forward to how this is explored. Next up we have Living the Beatles Legend. This one is by, I was going to say Bobby Womack, but it's not. It's Kenneth Womack. And this one is a biography of Mal Evans. Anyone who's familiar with the Beatles will know that Mal Evans was kind of a roadie and personal assistant and kind of just helped them with everything that they needed day to day. And I know sort of on the surface that can seem quite minor, you know, fetching toast and tea and carrying bags and things doesn't necessarily seem that glamorous, but the people who do those things for those sorts of artists get unprecedented access and see and are involved in everything, because they're the ones who keep kind of the minutiae of everybody's lives running. Unfortunately, you know, spoilers, but unfortunately Mal Evans obviously had a very sad end, but I am looking forward to finding out a bit more about who he was as a person and his story, and what kind of led to him being shot by police officers in Los Angeles. It's not where you think that story is going to go, but so yeah, I'm intrigued by that one. I'm interested because Mal Evans is a really important side character to the Beatles story. Next up I've got Hunter Davies' The Beatles Lyrics. This one, I think the subtitle, I've got it written down, The Unseen Story Behind Their Music is the subtitle for that. So this one, Hunter Davies did the authorised biography, but this one delves into the meaning behind the songs and why certain songs were written, what was intended by certain phrases or lyrics in there, and I was like that, sort of analysing and pulling songs apart to see what they were, the stories that they were telling. I think it's always really interesting, so I'm looking forward to that one. I think I've said I'm looking forward to all of them. I am looking forward to all of them. We can just caveat that. There isn't anything on this list that I don't really fancy reading. We've also got a book by Erin Torkelson Webber called The Beatles and Their Historians. I picked this one up because it's mentioned in the Stuart Maconie book that I read that sort of prompted this whole Fab Four February. He mentions this book in his book, and I was intrigued by the premise. So the basic point of this book is that she is writing about how people write about the Beatles, which I thought was kind of fitting for a month where I'm reading Beatles books, is to read something analysing how the Beatles are written about and how over time the way we write about the Beatles and the way we talk about the Beatles has changed and evolved. I think anything that's sort of a major cultural influence over time, as society shifts, as cultures shift, as trends shift, as generations move on, I think the way we talk about things changes, and looking at how the writing of the Beatles story has altered the further away from the event we've got, I think could be really intriguing. Next up, for find a bit of light relief, I have Paul is Undead, the Beatles zombie invasion. This one is by Alan Godshire, I think is his name. It's fiction, surprisingly. Yeah, the Beatles are zombies and they're being pursued by London's top zombie hunter, Mick Jagger. There's nothing about this that doesn't sound like I'm going to think it's funny. It'd be interesting to see whether it makes one joke last an entire book, whether there's enough there to kind of keep the humour coming. But yeah, so we've thrown some fiction in to kind of mix things up a little bit. Then we've got The Lost Album of the Beatles by Daniel Rachel. This one looks at, if the Beatles hadn't split up when they did, what would their next studio album have possibly been like? So he takes into account unreleased recordings that were made in the immediate run-up to the split, he takes into account the Beatles' solo output following them going their separate ways, which of those songs were being worked on at the time of the split that actually, if they had continued as a band, would likely have ended up as Beatles songs rather than solo output. And yeah, I'm really interested in that because quite a lot of the material that winds up on John, Paul and George's first solo albums out of the Beatles were songs, or featured heavily songs that they had been writing while they were still in the band. So it's entirely possible that if things hadn't ended when they did, that a lot of those songs would have been Beatles songs. And the album that could have been put together out of those sort of disparate writing efforts could have been something really special. So I'm looking forward to sort of looking at how the author thinks that might have sounded or played out. And last up, I've got one more fiction, and this is Leslie Ann Jones's Imagine. I was not in love with Leslie Ann Jones's biography of Christine McVie. She's got a good number of, this is what she writes music biographies, but this effort seems to have been an experiment with fiction. And she writes about a music journalist who witnesses the shooting of John Lennon, and years later, when she's gone on to have a successful career, somebody comes back and sort of starts to mess with her a little bit about the events of that evening, and it's about how that plays out. So it's a fictionalized story, but it obviously leans very heavily on Leslie Ann Jones's own career and her own time as a music journalist and as a writer, hanging out with these people. So I'm interested to see, because although I didn't enjoy the Christine McVie biography because I felt the content was lacking, I didn't have any problem with the style. The writing style rattled along really quite nicely, actually. I didn't mind the prose style at all. It was the content that bothered me. So I wouldn't mind seeing how that writing style applies itself to fiction. So yeah, we'll give that a go and see what we think. So those are my books for Fab Four February. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them, which I think is fine. I think 7 books for a relatively short month is a decent goal. I'm hopeful that I can get through quite a few of them, actually. I'm not gonna overextend myself and say I'm definitely going to read all 7, but I'd like to make a really good try at it. So we'll see. Fingers crossed. Anyway, I'll keep you updated on my progress. If you are reading anything Beatles related, in fact, if you're reading anything music related, pop it in the comments, because I'm always looking for books of that ilk to move on to next, and you might have found something that I haven't seen, so chuck it in. I wouldn't want to miss out. And anyway, I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.